Good day, students. This is the presentation for Adolescent Literature and Reading Support, Year 3, Semester 2. I'm your tutor for the subject, Melinda Coffey. And as you will see, my contact number is on the slide, as well as the contact times where you can ask me any questions or concerns that you have regarding the module. So I welcome you to this module for 2021, and I hope that you enjoy this module. So just some general notes on this. This presentation can be used to prepare for both your assignment and also for the examination. The content that you'll find within this presentation covers the most important points that you need to know, and you will be able to answer the questions of the assignment as well as the examination if you use this presentation in conjunction with your study guide. It's important that you don't just make use of the presentation, but that you also use your study guide, that you work through all of the learning outcomes, which points out the most important areas, and also that you work through the learning activities that's in the study guide. If you have gone through all of this, you should be able to have a good understanding of the contents, and it's important if you are able to put all of this information in your own words, then you know you really understand the work. So that should be your aim, is to be able to put all of what you have learned in your own words and to not just give through the information as it is in the study guide. So it's important that you make sure that you have the correct study guide. For this module, the study guide is written by Ms. R. Cawthorne in 2016. And it says Diploma in Education, Senior Secondary, Adolescent Literature and Reading Support. So just some general notes on the assignment and examinations. It's important that you answer all the questions that are listed. Only if it's stated that it's an option question, can you choose between two questions, but otherwise please answer all the questions as they are given. You will be given instructions on your assignment cover as well as on the examination cover. So please make sure that all your information is given as it is asked for on the covers, but also that you read through the general instructions. Then assignments can either be typed or handwritten, but please make sure that it is neat and legible. And make sure that you also adhere to the academic format of an assignment, which means that it has to have a cover page, it has to have an index where you list your questions that will be answered, that you give through all of the information, and that you end off with a reference or your sources. So this means that you indicate you used your study guide, or even if you used any other information sources, please list them there. Because you are making use of someone else's information and hard work, make sure that you also give them credit by listing them as your references. In the examination, it's also important to have your cover page. You will be given enough lines to write on directly on the examination script. And you must just please make sure that you write neat and legibly so that you can receive marks for the answers that you have given, so that we are able to read it nicely. Then it's important to read your questions carefully, make a note of the verbs that is being used. For instance, if it is just asked that you list something, you can just list the words underneath each other. It's not necessary to write a paragraph. And if the question counts 5 marks, please give through 5 facts. You will not receive more marks for giving through more facts. Then, if a question, for instance, says that you must discuss or argue, questions like that should please not be answered in bullet point format or listed only the keywords underneath each other. It means that you must discuss. So write it in a paragraph format, give through the information that you have, and give it through in your own words. Discuss or argue questions typically point out to the fact that you need to draw your own conclusion. So drawing your own conclusion means, what do you think about what the question asks? So read carefully what the verb is being used. In your study guide, there's a list of verbs and an explanation as to what each of these verbs mean. So if you need more clarity on the verbs, just check your study guide, please. Then we are going to start to take a look at the different study units. This module consists of 4 study units. Unit 1 is the selected theories of reading processes. So it starts off with telling you a little bit more about the reading process and then also discussing some of the theories. So the first outcome is that you should be able to describe the reading process. Now, process indicates that there's a certain amount of steps that need to be followed or stages. So the reading process has 5 stages in this case, and you need to be able to list all of those, to know them, and to also be able to explain what is meant by, for instance, developing word attack skills, or what is meant by evaluation. Then the next learning outcome is to be able to explain or discuss the statement that reading is a complex developmental process. So just like a child goes through developmental processes to learn to walk and to learn to talk, reading is the same, and you need to be able to explain what that statement means. So what is this process that a child goes through in order to be able to become a fluent reader one day? Then the next learning outcome is the specific theories or models about the reading process. There are in this case 3 of those models or theories, the first being the bottom-up reading process model. The second one is the top-down theory of reading. And then your third one is the interactive reading module. It's important that you are able to describe each of these as a theory or model on their own, but also to be able to describe the difference between 2 or 3 of these models. So how are they different from each other, but are there also some similarities between them? Then the next reading outcome is the fact that there's certain things that good readers do. You need to be able to list all of the things that a good reader will do. There's quite a long list of it. So it continues over 2 slides. And then in your study guide, you'll also note that there's things that good readers do before reading, during reading, and after reading. There's specific strategies that they use. Make sure that you also focus on this and that you read through that. Then when it comes to adolescents who are struggling with learning to read, they usually have these characteristics as to identify who are the struggling adolescents. So for instance, poor word recognition, speed and accuracy, weak vocabulary, they have little or no expression. So these are all characteristics that a student will show that indicates that there's a bit of a problem with reading. In your study guide, you'll note that there's many more of these characteristics. Please take a look and be able to at least list quite a few of them. Then there's different factors that influence a learner's learning to read. So there's the 6 main factors, which is the parent factor and adolescent literacy, the income factor, the community factor, the early learning factor, and the teacher factor. So you need to be able to not just list these, but describe what do we mean by the parent factor has an influence on a learner learning to read, or the community factor has an influence. Then there's specific ways to create a reading culture in school. There's a long list in your study guide as well. For instance, to talk about reading constantly, to have footprints towards the library, to create a read box. So it's important that you know that you are able to list a few ways in which a teacher or a principal can create a reading culture within a school, because there's different areas in the school that the culture can be created, and you need to be able to explain these different ways. Then that brings us to the end of Study Unit 1. Study Unit 2 is all about the importance of reading and literature in a learner's development. So how does literature affect a learner's basically development or their growth? It starts off with looking at 7 basic themes in adolescent literature. So slaying the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. You need to be able to list all 7 basic themes. Then motivation is always important, and it's important that learners are motivated to read. And you need to be able to describe why is it important for a teacher to motivate a learner to read, and also how that can be done. So the specific tips for motivating learners to read is also something that you need to be able to list. Then the next learning outcomes is the different types of reading and what are the purposes of these different types. So there's 4 different types. It's important that you are able to describe or define each type on its own, but also that you are able to compare 2 types with each other. For instance, how is intensive reading different from extensive reading, or maybe how are they similar as well to each other. So if we ask please be careful when reading the question. Does it ask you to list the differences, or does it ask you to compare? Because when we compare 2 things with each other, we list differences and similarities. Then there is a lot of different genres in adolescent literature. There's some adventure literature, there's the contemporary fiction, there's fantasy, there's graphic novels, there's mystery, romance. So please be able to list these, but also take a look at the description of each of these different genres. So be able to describe what do we mean by adventure literacy, for instance, and maybe the different books that children can read in this genre. Then literature plays a role in developing learners' moral values. It also plays a role in developing gender identity. And there's also suggestions for avoiding gender bias in literacy. And then it also has an effect on understanding the self and also understanding those around them. So for these 3 areas, their moral values, their sexual identity and gender roles, and also understanding of the self and others, it's important that you read through it, that you make sure what impact does literature have on these areas of growth or development of a learner. How does it impact, how would, for instance, reading a story impact a learner's moral values? Would it make a change? Would it not make a change? Would it have any kind of impact? You need to be able to give through the facts as it is in your study guide, but also be able to draw your own conclusion as to whether you think it has an actual impact on the learner's growth or development. Then you also need to be able to say how reading multicultural literature benefits teenagers. So once again, if learners read multicultural literature covering basically different cultures, what are the benefits to the teenager of being exposed to something like that? Then the next learning outcome is about what to look at when selecting quality works of adolescent literature. So what are the things that a teacher needs to look out for when they are going to select what storybook will be read by a classroom, for instance? So there's quite a long list. You need to be able to list these things and to explain it. Then it's important that learners are prepared for the reading process through reading readiness activities. There are quite a few reading readiness activities such as visual perception, visual discrimination, form constancy, visual memory, sequential memory, visual spatial relations, and figure ground. So it's important that you are able to list the different reading readiness activities, but also to define or describe each one. And then you'll note that under each one, there's specific activities that can be done to improve that area. So you also need to focus on which activities can be done in a classroom. Our next learning outcome is multimodal text. So what is multimodal text, and also how can it be used? So this is all part of study unit 3 already, which is about the effective teaching of reading. So you need to be able to describe or define a multimodal text and how it is used in a classroom. Why would a teacher use it? What benefits can there be for the learners? Then there's specific reading skills to apply when reading out loud to secondary readers. So this is rate, tone, pitch, volume, expression, and character voices. So it's important that you are able to list these, but also to describe them. So what do we mean when we say the rate at which someone reads or the tone with which someone reads? So please be able to also give a brief description of what it is. Then the focus of reading instruction for early readers is different from the focus of reading instruction for adolescent readers. So in the first block, you'll see it's what do we focus on with early readers, and then what do we focus on in the second block for adolescent readers. So those 5 things, the word study, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and motivation, is known as the 5-point program. And it's important that you also read through each of these, what it is and how it is applied. Then there's specific activities that can be done to help readers who are struggling to read. There's quite a long list of these activities, such as break the ice, the getting to know you today song, dictionary word, giving the gift of reading, deduction, text quiz, reaction. So please be able to list the different types of activities that can be used, but also be able to describe them as well. Then the next learning outcome is all about comprehension skills. How can comprehension skills be enhanced within the classroom? So there's different ways. There's the question-answer relationship technique. You need to be able to describe what that is. Then you need to be able to describe what do we mean by pair rehearsal. And then there's allowing readers to choose their own books to read. This specific topic, there's 7 benefits. You need to be able to list these benefits, but also you need to be able to think about this question in terms of, is it beneficial to allow learners to choose their own books? After reading through the whole section and looking at the benefits, do you agree with that? Do you think that there's any value in a teacher giving the learners the option to choose their own book, or should they just give them a specific textbook to read? Then there's specific strategies that learners should be taught so that they become independent reading. You need to be able to list these specific strategies, such as clarifying, comparing, and contrasting. But you also need to be able to describe a bit what is meant by each of these. So what do we mean when we say that they must connect to prior experiences? And what do we mean when we say they must be summarizing? Then, just the same way as we looked at the previous ones, we need to also look at reading retention. So it's not just about reading comprehension, but also reading retention in struggling learners. So they need to be able to know how to comprehend and also understand what they're reading, but also retain the information that they have read. And there's specific reading comprehension strategies that will help retention to be strengthened. So these comprehension strategies is questioning, vocabulary instruction, monitoring, summarizing, focus and attention, and the role of motivation. And you need to be able to list these as well as describe them, please. Then the next section is the reading corner within a classroom, which can help with motivating learners to read and encouraging learners to read. So it's important to read through all of the information in the study guide, and then also to think for yourself and imagine if you were setting up a reading corner in your classroom. What are the things that you would want to put in that reading corner so that children are really encouraged to go and to read a book? So you would, for instance, want a nice warm carpet, you want some bean bags or maybe a cozy pillow, you'd want chairs. books and bookshelves. So think about the specific items that you would place within a reading corner. So when the question is asked about how to create a reading corner, please read the question carefully and do not just give through ideas such as, for instance, creating a woodlands a reading corner, but to be specific if asked what items you would place there, to say what kind of things would go there. Would you put a chair? Would you put a pillow? So the specific kinds of items. Then there's specific features of an effective reading program. It's important that you are able to list each of these, but also to describe each of these in full. And then this unit ends off with the advantages of using e-books compared to using conventional books. So what is the advantage of using an e-book, which is on a Kindle or tablet, instead of giving an actual hard copy book to a learner to read? Is there any advantages or are there no advantages? And then be able to, the keywords that are listed here, you need to be able to describe what is meant by those. Then study unit 4 starts, which is about the assessment of reading programs, and providing specific learner support for reading difficulties. So the first learning outcome is about the purpose of assessment. So why would we do specific assessments with learners? Because the information goes to the learner, because of the information that goes to the parent, but also to evaluate the teaching or learning process of the reading program. Then there's types of assessment. So the first one is the purposes of assessment, and now we are at the types of assessment. There is the formative assessment, there's the continuous assessment, and then there's the summative assessment. So in this area, it's important that you are able to define each of these. So for instance, what is formative assessment and what is continuous assessment, but also be able to distinguish between the two. So what are the differences between the two and how would you use them differently? And then there's methods of assessment. So there's a difference between the previous slide, types of assessments, and the methods in which the assessment is applied. So your different methods for applying the different types of assessment is, it can be an informal way, it can be a formal way, and it can be a criterion referenced assessment. So do you do it in a very informal way where you just assess, you basically look at how children are doing their activities, or is it a more formal way whereby there's tests or orals that are done? Then there's some common reading problems that are found in our country. You need to be able to list the common reading problems that's found. So all of these ones that's listed here, such as an incorrect approach to reading or not processing print phonetically, poor phonemic awareness, improper directional tracking, limited vocabulary, poor comprehension. So you need to be able to list a few of these common reading problems in Namibia. Then we move on to standardized tests. So this is a more specific assessment that's done. You need to be able to explain or define what is a standardized test. And then you also need to be able to list the most common forms of standardized tests. Then there's specific learner support that is given to different reading difficulties in the junior secondary phase. So this is teaching essential skills and strategies, provide differentiated instruction, provide explicit and systematic instruction, provide opportunities to apply skills and strategies, and don't just cover the critical content. Be sure that the learners actually learn it. So you need to be able to list these different types of learning support, but also to describe what is meant by each of them. How would a teacher implement them within the classroom? Then there are different ways to increase a struggling reader's self-esteem. This is also one of the learning outcomes in the study guide. You must be able to list the different ways that a teacher can use to increase the learner's self-esteem within the classroom. So there's quite a few. There's a long list of different ways that it can be done. You have to be able to explain a few of them. Then, what are literature circles? So this is basically where your study guide starts to end off, looking at how can a smaller group be used for book report writing and for discussing what has been read. So literature circles are then small temporary discussion groups of learners who have chosen to read the same work of literature. So you need to be able to define a literature circle, and then you should be also able to say how can literature circles be used within the classroom as a way of, for instance, doing a book report. So you will use it because it's a place of cooperative learning, because literature circle allows learners to make choices about their learning. Literature circles are also fun, and it's a social experience for learners. And then the final reason is because learners have a choice, and it's a cooperative learning structure. So you need to be able to explain why would literature circles be used in a classroom by giving through these reasons, but also, for instance, you should be able to draw your own conclusion. Looking at the reasons that listed here, would you, for instance, as a teacher, think about using a literature circle, or do you not see that there's any benefits to learners to use a literature circle in a classroom setting? And that then brings us to the end of our presentation for adolescent literature and reading support. Like I said in the beginning, you can use this to prepare for your assignment, but also use it to prepare for your examination. All of the content that's covered in here is found in your study guide, and it's based on the learning outcomes and the learning activities. So as long as you work through those, you will have a very good understanding of the work that is in the study guide. You will be able to answer all your assignment questions and answer all your examination questions. I once again ask you to please not just basically copy and paste all of the information as it stands in your study guide, but rather to give through the information in your own words so that it is clear that you have a good understanding of the work that the work you have read through. I wish you all the best for the assignment and for the examination, and if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. My email address and phone number is on the cover of the assignment that you will receive, but my phone number is also in the beginning of this presentation, and you are welcome to contact me. Thank you.